They found bones under the kitchen floor. Not from animals, but from humans. The town doctor refused to go back inside. And when the preacher looked at the names carved on the grave markers behind the house, names that were the same as both the mother and the wife, he left town and never came back. What happened on that hill in 1892 was so sick and so wrong that the county records were quietly changed. But one birth paper survived, and it had only one name on it, his name. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. There are places in this country where families stay together for many generations, close, winding, and never far from each other. Western Appalachia is one of them. Cut off by rough mountains and terrible poverty, families didn't move much. But the story of Jacob Elbridge doesn't come from being poor. It comes from an unhealthy obsession. Jacob was born in the winter of 1869 in a cabin deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. His father was listed as unknown. His mother, Sarah Elbridge, was 31 years old at the time. She was not married, kept to herself, and the townspeople only knew her as that strange girl with the high, childlike voice. She rarely came down from the mountain. When she did, people whispered about the way she stared too long, and how she always bought twice as much food, one for herself and one for the son no one ever saw. But he was real, and more than that, he was being trained. Neighbors would later say secretly that they heard strange chanting from the hills at night, sometimes laughter, sometimes crying. But the most disturbing detail was that the laughter always came from two voices overlapping, both the same pitch, one male, one female, like someone copying someone else or teaching someone to copy them perfectly. Jacob wasn't raised like a child. He was raised like a partner, a shadow, a copy. By the time he turned 15, he was 6 feet tall, pale as bone, and never came to town. But Sarah did, and she brought with her a ring, small, handmade, carved from the wood of the very trees that surrounded their lonely home. The words carved on it, now kept in a local museum, said, "To my life, from your birth." Not a gift from a mother, but a gift from a wife. The 1890 census lists Jacob Elbridge as head of household, age 21. But here's where the records break apart. There is no wife recorded, no brothers or sisters, no boarders, just him. And one other woman listed only as S. Elbridge, age 52. Relationship unknown. Not mother, not wife, just a presence. That year, local land surveyors noticed that the Elbridge land had grown. 4 nearby families had sold their land within months of one another, all for far less than it was worth. All moved away without warning. Some say they were scared off by threats or by something worse. But they left behind farm animals, tools, even their family Bibles. It was as if they had to leave right away, as if something had changed. And it had, because that was the year Jacob and Sarah began building what would come to be known as the house with no rooms. It wasn't a normal home. It was a maze. 7 buildings connected by narrow, winding hallways with mirrors placed in strange locations and windows boarded up from the inside. The mailman refused to deliver past the gate. He said the trees around the property were not right, too much leaning inward, like they were growing towards something at the center. Locals started calling the place the womb, and Jacob, he began to be seen walking the edge of town in his black coat, always barefoot, always silent. Children said he stared too long, that he didn't blink, that he smelled like perfume, specifically her perfume. By the fall of that same year, Sarah stopped appearing at all. But Jacob began talking about someone again and again as my beloved. In conversations, in letters, even in a strange journal found years later in the ashes of their home. He wrote about her as if she were both alive and dead, a wife and a mother, a god and a ghost. One entry said, "She is before me and within me. Her touch makes me pure. Her name is my name." He signed it, not Jacob but Elbridge. First name left out, just the family name. In 1892, a local doctor named Dr. Walter Griggs was called to the Elbridge property. No one knows who sent the letter, only that it was written in perfect handwriting, inked in a dark reddish-brown color, and sealed with wax pressed by what looked like a human tooth. Dr. Griggs was nervous but curious. He'd long been doubtful of the rumors, thought they were just backward gossip. But what he saw that night would haunt him until his death. His notes, found after his death and now locked in a university storage room, are short but terrifying. He wrote about an upstairs room filled with dolls made from animal bones and dried corn husks, each one with the same face, Sarah's. He described narrow hallways lined with paintings, all of the same two people, but aged to show their faces at different times of life. In one, the woman looks like a teenager and the boy an infant. In the next, she is middle-aged and he a young man, but in the final painting, they are shown as husband and wife, standing hand in hand, with identical eyes and mouths sewn shut with thread. But it was what he found beneath the house that broke him. A root cellar had been expanded, almost tunneled, into the earth. What began as a storage room went deeper into a passageway of packed dirt and burned beams. At its end, a crude chapel, and in the center, a bed. Upon it, the skeleton of a woman covered in lace, her hands folded over a dried-up bouquet. Above her, painted roughly in what Griggs believed was dried blood, the words, "The bride returns when the sun is ready." Griggs ran away without taking more notes. He never returned, never spoke about it publicly, and when pressed, said he had seen a marriage not blessed by God or man. What the town didn't know was that by the time he entered that house, Sarah Elbridge had been dead for over a year. But Jacob never buried her. Instead, he preserved her, maintained her, kept her body in a sacred space underground, and continued to talk about her in writing and conversation as both his mother and his wife. By the late 1890s, Jacob Elbridge had become less man than myth. Stories spread like wildfire through the region, whispers of chanting heard through the trees, sightings of a pale figure walking in circles at dusk, and the strong belief that the Elbridge family line had broken some cosmic law. But something changed in 1898. A fire. No one knows how it started, but it moved fast. Too fast for the local soil, which was known to be damp in summer. By the time neighbors arrived, the house was gone. Or rather, it had collapsed in on itself. The womb, as it was mockingly called, had become a grave. What they found in the ruins shocked even the most doubtful. 3 bodies. The first was easily identified as Jacob, his spine badly twisted, arms crossed over his chest, teeth filed down to sharp points. Around his neck was a rotting cord of braided hair, Sarah's hair. The second was Sarah herself, still in the same position on the chapel bed, beneath the house. Her skin had been treated with some kind of resin, her eyes covered with small white stones. One hand rested on a Bible, the other held a lock of Jacob's hair. But the third body, burned, deformed, smaller, was unexplained. It appeared to be a child, but with adult body proportions. Its face was badly disfigured, as if the bone structure had collapsed in on itself, and its fingers 6 on each hand. No records existed of another person living there. No woman had ever been seen entering the property, but what disturbed the coroner most wasn't the extra fingers or the deformities. It was the jaw. The third body's jawbone matched Jacob's almost perfectly. Not just genetically, but in structure oddities in the molars, the same crooked front tooth, even a break from childhood that had healed wrong. The odds were incredibly low. The meaning clear. Jacob had fathered a child with his mother, and the child had lived and died, possibly in that fire. Some locals claim Jacob set the house on fire himself, either in shame or in the belief that only fire could release them from what they had become. Others believe it was the town, that someone or something wanted the Elbridge name erased. But it didn't work, because months later a new name appeared in the church records. E. Jacobson, age 7, orphan, adopted. The name E. Jacobson seemed harmless enough, just another orphan in a town that preferred not to ask questions. He was taken in by Reverend Clean, a man known for his charity and unfortunate bad luck with children. His wife had died during childbirth, and his own son had drowned years before. Locals believed the Reverend saw this new boy as a second chance. But strange things began happening almost immediately. E. Jacobson refused to sleep indoors. He insisted on building a small shelter behind the church, made from branches, roots, and thrown-away cloth. When questioned, he said the church walls crushed the voices. When asked what voices, he'd reply simply, "The ones that sing her name." He never mentioned his parents, never asked where they went, but he did carve a small wooden object, a ring identical to the one Sarah Elbridge had given Jacob decades before, and he wore it constantly. Reverend Clean began keeping a journal documenting the child's behavior. At first, it was minor strange drawings, sleepwalking, repeating phrases in a language no one recognized, but by winter the entries became frantic. "He doesn't age," Clyn wrote. "His face changes slightly. I swear he smiles like an old man. Sometimes I hear two voices when he speaks, one high, one low. He keeps calling me father, but with a tone that chills me, like I am less than him, like I am the child." One night, during a particularly violent thunderstorm, Clean woke up to find E. Jacobson standing over his bed, soaking wet, smiling. In his hand, a burned piece of paper with smeared ink. The only readable words, "The bride returns when the sun is ready." That was the last night E. Jacobson was seen in public. Clyn's home burned to the ground 3 days later. His body was found in the cellar, positioned exactly like Sarah Elbridge had been, eyes covered, hands folded, mouth stitched shut. The boy was gone. No footprints, no witnesses. Just one final journal entry scratched into the wall of the shelter behind the church. She came back, not as before, but as fire, and she took me in her arms. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your family line? Decades passed. The Elbridge name faded from memory on purpose. Locals began calling that ridge the Burn Place, a name their children learned not to ask about, and the church records where E. Jacobson had been written were mysteriously lost in a flood in 1911. But trauma, even when buried, has a way of blooming underground. In 1934, a government surveyor named Lewis Penn was sent to document old land titles for a rural electrification project. He was thorough, obsessive even. He wanted to map everything, every stone wall, every broken fence. And that's how he found it. At the top of a ridge, long overgrown, was a well. At least that's what he thought until he removed the rotten wood covering it and found stairs instead. Spiral, carved from stone, leading down into total darkness. Penn was not a superstitious man. He carried a flashlight, rope, and a revolver. He went down alone. His personal field notes, later recovered from his abandoned vehicle, describe a winding descent into what he called a room that feels older than the land around it. It was circular, with walls covered in mirrors, each cracked down the center, but positioned to face each other endlessly. In the middle sat a wooden chair, small and child-sized, and on the walls, painted in faded red, again the phrase, "The bride returns when the sun is ready." Next to the chair lay a ring. Penn picked it up, described it in detail: wooden, carved, identical to the one from the Elbridge archives. But what disturbed him was the name burned into the inside: E. Jacobson. He tried to leave, but something followed him. That's what he wrote in the margins of the notes, in increasingly frantic handwriting. "It knows my name. It's watching through the mirrors. She's here." Then nothing. His flashlight was later recovered, found in the woods 5 miles from the ridge, batteries intact. His revolver was discovered in a creek, rusted but loaded. Penn was never seen again. To this day, locals refuse to hike that ridge. Hunters say the birds won't fly over it. And some say that on windless nights, if you stand quietly, you'll hear something echoing from beneath the earth. 2 voices, one male, one female, singing the same name. There are families in American history whose sins are recorded in court documents, newspaper clippings, and death certificates. But the Elbridges are not one of them. Their story lives in whispers, in burned journals, and in the buried guilt of a town that tried to forget. But forgetting does not mean erasing. In 1979, a graduate student from the University of Virginia, researching folklore for his dissertation, stumbled across the name Jacob Elbridge in a faded newspaper tucked into a church Bible for safekeeping. The article was brief, just a single sentence. J. Elbridge, believed dead in the fire, 1898, no family. But the student, interested, dug deeper. What he found was a scattered paper trail, odd purchases from old ledgers, land deeds signed with only an initial, and dozens of missing person reports filed over a span of 80 years, all near the same wooded ridge. He tried to map them: every incident, every unexplained disappearance, every burned home, and what appeared chilled him to his core. A spiral, the center of which was the old Elbridge property. His research was never published. His professor dismissed it as hysteria disguised as anthropology. But the student's notes, later found by his roommate, revealed something else. Drawings, dozens of them, each one of a woman in a wedding veil, no eyes, just empty sockets filled with hair, and a boy beside her, growing older in each image, until finally, in the last sketch, they were the same. A man and woman, hand in hand, with mouths sewn shut and a ring on each finger. One final note sat at the bottom of the folder, handwritten and seemingly scrawled in panic. The line never broke. The blood runs backward. She marries what she births, and he births what he marries. In 1981, the student vanished on a hiking trip near the same ridge. His body was never recovered. Only his camera was found, its final photo showing a shadowed figure in a white dress, half hidden behind a crooked tree. Some say it was a prank. Others say it was her. But those who've lived long in that region, they never speak her name, never walk the ridge, and never wear rings carved from wood. Because the Elbridge legacy isn't a family tree. It's a circle, unbroken, eternal, rotating in silence beneath the roots of America.